Good, thanks. How are you? I got all confused. I had to because
All
I've been drinking
hail,
my
Rudi.
juice, people. And don't forget to cheers the great man himself. All hail, Rudi.
All hail, Rudi.
I just heard a voice in the background. No doubt we're going to get to meet that voice person in a minute. Today is Friday the 17th of February. Is it February or February? It's hot where I am and it's cold where you are. That's the only thing I can do nowadays. And that was a little picture of Bunya Mountains where I was. And my very special guest for the day, I think some of you have met him before. And welcome him back. G'day, John.
G'day, Gerald. How are you, mate?
I love having you here.
I love being here, quite frankly.
Why do you like coming here?
Because we're mates and also we love a good conversation.
Before we get into that, there are some people on here going, who's he?
Who's he?
Who's he?
I'm
He
just
doesn't-
a bloke.
No, but who are you? Like if people just go, who's this man?
That's the existential question? Who am I?
Big word. Big
Who
word.
am I?
But who are you?
Mate, I'm just a bloke that lives on the coast here.
We have a very long coast all the way from Cairns.
Yes, Sunshine Coast, so an hour north of Brisbane with my family. I've got a wife, but my two older kids don't actually live with us at the moment, and because they're adults, which is good. And do a bit of work. We've known each other, worked commercially for maybe 25 years, and I also run a men's program called Marcus Mission, which is a suicide prevention program for men based on social support.
You're looking a little bit blurred out there, but I can fix that a little bit later. And I look like I've got a big head.
I look pasty. I look pasty. I look white.
You do. Maybe I should fix up. Can you just wait a moment? Just settle down a little bit. Because I might just go into, you're looking I don't know what that is.
I saw the question, where on the Sunshine Coast? I live on the north side of Mount Coolum, which is sort of between, Caloundra and Noosa. It's like midway point.
I think that's a bit better. You don't look so pasty now.
Good, mate. Thank you.
Right. What do we want to do today?
I'd love chatting to you, but I'd really like to talk about conflict.
Why?
Why? Because I just love it. I love conflict in my life. I thrive on it. I'm a drama king. No, because it's one of those factors that leads blokes to suicide ideation. It's always like one of those top 5 factors.
Because we were talking just a little bit earlier on about the top factors, and I was saying I thought it was like loss of income, loss of a family member, a close family member.
Yeah.
So de-escalating a certain situation, and I don't need to get them from angry to calm. I need to get them from angry to less angry, from hostile to less hostile, because then I can at least have a chat with them. But when you're talking about conflict, there's either two ways that you deal with conflict. One is that you have conflict resolution, and the other one is conflict regulation. Is there a difference?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that I really like the work that we do, like most of our stuff is based on some research, and the research we do around relationships is John and Julie Gottman from the Gottman Institute, American folks, who did the biggest study on relationships and what helps them and what hinders them. And when one of the things they came up with, which I thought was really fascinating, and I wish I'd known this when I was young, is that 69% of all conflict in marriages is unresolvable because it's based on value differences. So, for instance, if I was brought up, if I go to the shop, so if I take my kids when they were younger to the shop, we just go in quickly, get milk, bread and fruit or whatever, and we're out of there. But similar sort of, single income family,
Yeah.
her family was about, you go into a shop and if you want to get a chocky milk or you want to get something, you grab that as well. So there was always this sort of conflict about, well, what's appropriate? Like at the end of the day, it's what's most appropriate for you because it's based on how you're raised and based on how you view the world. So we made a simple decision. The kids can go with whoever they want to the shops, and they never went with me.
So where do you start? Where's the starting point? So say you and I were to get into a bit of a conflict there, and it might be about ideas or values or situations. And when you have a look at, we could split the world up in two, and we can go all the anti-vaxxers on one side, and you got all the pro-vaxxers on another side, and then you got that in families, and one family member might be so pro-vaccination, and the other family member might be so anti-vaccination. How do they resolve that? So where's the starting point?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So, one of the things, if we go back to that idea of resolution versus regulation, like one of the things we've got to think about is what are those conflicts that keep going on and on and on, and you can talk about it till you're blue in the face, but you're never going to fix it. You're never going to resolve it because we're obsessed with resolution. Like when you and I started facilitating maybe 25, 30 years ago, we did 2 days on conflict resolution. And it was almost as if there's an outcome there that you're working towards and you're going to have this shake hands, which is bullshit. The Gottmans say, a big chunk of that you can't resolve. So rather than resolving it, how do you regulate it? How do you make sure it doesn't get out of control? And so, for instance, with families, they say, pick your battles. Make sure that you think about the things that maybe you can resolve and work calmly through those. So one of the things that they say is, the first step, the biggest step, like your de-escalation workshops, we've got to reduce the arousal. We've got to reduce the emotion. At the end of the day, when we start getting emotional, imagine the tide's rising and as the tide rises, it reaches a point where the switch in the frontal lobe, the rational part of the brain, the neocortex just switches off. In other words, I can want to be rational and reasonable, but I can't because I'm now in this limbic mode, which is fight or flight. So unless I can get the emotion and the arousal down to a point where I can speak to you about stuff and I can truly listen, you can listen to me and we can work through stuff, I'm stuffed. There's no chance that we're going to have a good result. So, first and foremost, de-escalation at a personal level means that I've got to be prepared to let go of the ego and actually put that to one side and take a whole bunch of deep diaphragm breaths and really try and tune in, even though I disagree with what's happening for the other person. And that's a skill that needs to be developed over time.
Mate, we had this chat just before when I was making your beautiful cup of coffee.
Indeed.
And we were talking about the different levels of coffee, that's my ADD kicking in, why we have good coffee and not so good coffee. Anywho, we need to talk about that a little bit later because I'm a coffee connoisseur. But I want to talk to you about, let's just use, say you and I, you say something to me, and let's just use it as another party next to me, say Frank. Frank's always good, okay? So you and I, we're talking together, and then we're good mates, have been for 25 years, but Frank is saying to you, saying, John, the way that you spoke to Gerald was a little bit disparaging. It was a bit like you kind of hurt, I think you hurt his feelings. Now, you and I, because we've known each other, I just go, whatever, John, fucking too funny.
Yeah.
Why does another person feel like that they can say to you how they think I'm feeling because of what you said? Why does that happen? Because that happens, because that's what I call the virtue signaling. And to do that, it's like, and I'll try to do this as respectful as possible. It's like trying white people. I'm not racist here, but it's like white people trying to tell Aboriginals or the Indigenous people how they should live their life. So, and that's that virtue signaling. So I get confused with that. Why can't we just leave that all alone? So going back to the John, Gerald, Frank scenario, why do they have to get involved?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And if we go back to like a definition of conflict, which is basically that conflict is where you've got differing goals and essentially you perceive interference by someone else in those goals.
Yeah.
So let's look at that as one example of what conflict's about. So I'm trying to achieve something, you're trying to achieve something, and we're perceiving that you're getting in the way of that goal. But if we think about that, one of the things, you're absolutely right, that imposing our values on others is part of it, isn't it? And one of the things that I think is really important here as adults is that we don't, I hate, and I know you're the same, I hate gossip, I hate politics, I hate all the crap. And one of the things that I sort of think about here is, if I'm a bit of a control freak or, and it might be, guys, there's sort of social injustice, I think I need to stand up for you. But, at the end of the day, sure, I can have a reflection and I can say, hey, Gerald, this is what I noticed. This is what I noticed when such and such was speaking. How was that for you? And you go, oh, well, John's actually a really good mate of mine and we have a lot of banter and it's all good. So part of this is not taking responsibility for someone else's conflict. Avoid this triangulation where I have to get involved or I have to speak to someone else about conflict. Why don't I open it up between John and Gerald? But also it's the notion that it's based on goodwill and it's based on the level of banter. But it's also, there's another part of that. And that is that I've realised in my life a lot, through my life, that there's blind spots. And a blind spot is where I've got really good intentions in the way I speak to someone, but because I'm not aware of the impact of it, it can have some collateral damage. So for instance, Sim might say to me at home, when the kids were young, she might say, I know you got really good intentions, but when you said that, this is the impact on the kids. And it's not good. It's not a good thing, What do you reckon? Can we talk about
is it? Is it, I can't think. Oh, Johari window? Is that Johari, that blind spot that you're talking about? So they're recognising something in the kids that you can't see.
Exactly. And so I'm sort of, in my mind, I go, I've got really good intentions here and I need to give some feedback. But maybe Sim's going, well, mate, it was pretty blunt.
Yeah.
And it was pretty brutal and they're only kids or whatever.
Yeah.
So, fair enough, you've got good intentions, but you've got to take responsibility for your impact as well. So, but a lot of that depends on relationships because, the more you trust the other person, the more goodwill is in that relationship, the more you know each other, the more perhaps you can have some room to move in terms of how you give feedback.
For those people who are listening, we are talking to John Morgan from Marcus Mission. And if you do like to call in, there is a link on the top of the screen and you can talk to John and we can have a few... you're up for a discussion, aren't you? Whack the headphones in and have a listen. I've got a couple of people wrote some things. Lee Clark had written, hi, John. Have you noticed lately higher emotions and people with less patience?
Yeah, it's a really good comment, isn't it, about what are we noticing? And I reckon part of this is about stress and anxiety and layered stress where people are dealing with their own shit, and maybe not appreciating that they're close to the edge, and I reckon if we don't have a good insight as to how we're feeling at any one time in the day, we could lose it and get uptight, get impatient. But we blame it on the other person.
Yes.
And yet it's probably the fact that I'm worrying about increasing mortgages and I'm worrying about my kids at school or I've got some behavioural issues or I've got my own stuff. So one of the things that I've got to be able to do is I think we've got to be able to know where we're at one given time when it comes to our level of contentment versus our level of anxiety. Because I know for one, I've had huge blind spots there where I think, oh no, I'm good, I'm fine, and putting on a bit of a mask.
Yeah.
And then I'll lose my shit over some little thing. And I'll go, what's that about? But it wasn't about the little thing. It was about the build-up of all the other stresses and stuff that I've been worried about.
There's something that somebody else asked, I think 2 + 2 Cats just wrote this. Doesn't that stem from a guilt complex and overreacting by virtue signalling to feel better? Part vanity, part absolution, part belonging to a group.
Wow.
Activism.
That's really cool. I really like that. My goodness, I can't even spell those words, I have to say. But I really like it. I think it's such a good point, isn't it, about taking responsibility for other people's stuff and also that idea of being a bit of a protector. I want to protect my friend or whatever. But you're right about this virtuous stuff. You know, I'm coming from this, if you like, this paragon of virtue. I'm really good. Just ask me.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I'll speak on your behalf because it'll make me feel better about myself.
Yeah.
As opposed to allowing people to make choices, and maybe if there was a third party, if it was you, me, and a third party, and the third party wanted to share that with you,
Yeah.
why not wait till the conversation's
Exactly.
finished?
Yes.
And John's left, and then why not engage the curiosity? Hey, mate, how was that for you? I noticed that John said such and such. Wow, what was that like? Because for me, just from my own sort of values, I felt, well, that was a bit strong. And you might go, oh, mate, we just have that banter. That's just part of our relationship. Nobody takes offence by it.
The one thing that gets me, because there's got to be pub John. Is there pub John? And then there's professional John?
I'm
No?
pretty much the same, I reckon.
Really?
Yep.
So you would have no problem, and I want to call you out on this, you would have no problem dropping F-bombs. I don't know, if you and I want to do psychedelics together, smoke weed, that's at the pub, right? If we want to do that together. So you're then saying, oh, no, I'm pretty much the same. So in one of your workshops, you would go, hey, everyone, how you all doing? Forget the minties. What we want to do is let's do some psychedelics. So there's got to be...
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well...
Yeah, no, I mean, there's authenticity, isn't there? You know, where you're a real deal and you're straight up and you talk to people about how you are. But there's also this idea about what's appropriate in the circumstances. And so one of the things that, and I was speaking to my son actually about it, who's 29 this year, and you know, his wife's really good with him because she talks about, mate, there's a time and place to say that, and it may not be the right audience or it may not be appropriate, but it's also about disclosure. How much disclosure do I want to make? You know, what's appropriate professionally, what's appropriate personally, but also with you. You know, I know we could share anything with each other and never feel judged. And
Totally.
I think that, and we have, you know, over many years, we have done that. And that's a very unique relationship because there's kind of an intimacy there where I can feel safe. And I don't want to use the wank words, you know, psychologically safe, but it is kind of that. I feel safe that I can say anything and you're going to keep it confidential. But not only that, you're going to support me in that and I'm not going to feel that it's inappropriate.
Mate, we've got a caller on the line already.
Great.
So Tim Hill, we're going to have a chat to Tim in a second. Let me just bring this up for a moment. And Tim, I know you're on the line, mate. Just hang on 2 seconds and let me just organise myself because my producer decided not to play the game today. So I'm going to do this all on my Pat Malone. Firstly, Tim, you need to turn off your background. I can hear the background me. So you need to turn that off, mate. It might be a little bit easier. All right, hang on 2 seconds and let me just bring you on. All right, just give me a second. All right. I think I found you. Yeah, got the right audio. We can hear you. Let me go into this one here. There we go. Let me go, okay. There you go. Mate, it looks like you're frozen a little bit, but we can hear you nice and clear. We can hear you. So you have frozen, but that's all right. We can hear you. What would you like to ask John or talk to John about?
I can see me. I can't hear me.
Okay, so
Can
you
you
should be
hear
able to
me?
hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear.
What have I done?
We can hear you. You can't hear us, mate. You have frozen. It looks like you're not getting through. That's okay. We might leave it for
Got the
now.
right mic set up.
Yeah, it's just you're frozen, mate. You're frozen.
On the right audio.
No, okay.
Yeah, I
we'll
can
might have to
see
leave it,
I'm-
mate,
I'm-
because
I'm
if you can't
broadcasting
hear
on
us,
push-
yep, it's all right. It's all sorry, mate. We'll just have to. It's just what happens. It's what happens. So John and I are going to continue our conversation, and it looks like you've got for us. Let me just remind everyone. if you are going to come onto StreamYards, you need to turn off everything else. Turn off your YouTube, turn off your other phone. Just concentrate on the conversation that you're having with us, because otherwise what happens is that you get all that feedback. So that might be easier that we do that. So, John, let's continue. You had a couple of... let me just go into this one here. I think that might be easier. You had a couple of slides that we want to have a look at. Do we want to try to have a look at some of the sliding here and see what is probably one of the things? Is this one a good one?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about that. It comes from differences, differences in needs, values, perceptions. And I guess one of the implications of that, and by the way, I'm not coming in any way from an expert position. I'm coming from the fact that I've made a mess of this a lot, but there's some good principles that we can think about. So if we think about that idea of differences in perceptions, and then we think about, well, one of the goals, isn't it, is to be open, be respectful, to have a good conversation, but also not to personalise stuff. Not to let if you like, the biggest enemy in conflict and conversations is ego, because the will come in and protect the ego and stop us from being open. So one of the things there's when we think about that notion of differences in perceptions, once we can get that arousal down, once we can take a few deep diaphragm breaths and challenge our mindset and, go, just listen, just tune in or whatever, that one of the first things that I think we've got to do is invite the other person to share their perspective once we're at that level, if you like, and to be able to reflect back what we're hearing. So it sounds like to me that, this is your big concern, this is what you're trying to achieve. Listen to me now, and let's have a chat about that and hear my concerns. So it's this idea of, I listen first, I validate what your perspective is, your truth. I don't have to agree with it, but I certainly have to accept it. And part of acceptance is being able to reflect back what I'm hearing from the other person. And that's really hard when you're personally challenged, because in your mind you're going, oh, this is bullshit, or whatever. But you've got to be able to reflect that back. And in the process of doing that, we're establishing some goodwill. So I'm self-regulating, I'm keeping the emotions under control, I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting back, I'm trying to understand your perspective, and then hopefully you'll do the same with me. But the searching for middle ground might even be as simple. I remember doing a mediation recently with an aged care group, and there was two nurses, and they were at each other's throat, and it was impacting the team and it was impacting the residents certainly and stuff. And one of the things that we could agree on, the only thing we could kind of agree on, because it was pretty difficult, that whole process of engaging and reflecting and stopping them and getting them to reflect again, was that the only thing they could agree on is that the current situation was unsuitable. Wasn't good for them personally, wasn't good for each other, wasn't good for their team members, wasn't good for the aged care clients, because it was impacting the service they were providing. So, once we can get some sort of agreement, even agreeing that what we're doing at the moment is not helpful, then we can start to think about, okay, well, how can we work through this a bit more and get out the other side without always being activated by it, without always being triggered by it. And the other part about this, the agreement was, we don't have to like each other. We just have to work respectfully, professionally together for the bigger purpose, which is about caring for these beautiful old people that who were in this residential facility and deserve that in the last years of their life. So how do we put aside the ego and the personal differences and agree on what the ground rules are in the engagement with each other?
I always find it difficult, or not so much myself, but I hear this a lot when people are saying, how do I deal with a person who's just so set in their ways? And look, if you can go, I think we use the vaccination as one point, but the other point would be, anti-climate. So there's the climate deniers, and then there's the climate activists. Yeah. And you can always split the room in two. You can and there'll be some people that will sit on the fence, go, I need more information. But what do we do with someone where, if I know I'm totally 100% correct in my brain, that I know this is the truth, this is the facts, I can search the facts, I can look this up. Yeah. But there's another person who just wants to argue with me and continue to argue with me their point of view. And I know you mentioned the word their truth, but it's not even their truth. It's just their lie, because they're lying to themselves. But I know we, the ones who are the factual ones, have to look at them and say, hang on a minute, look, I get where you're coming from. It totally makes sense to you, but that's not what I've researched. But they don't like that.
But that's...
And they shut down the conversation.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like sometimes it doesn't matter. Like you've got to have two people that are prepared to play in a conversation and prepared to listen to each other and be a bit open-minded. Unless you've got kind of two parties that are prepared to be a little bit open-minded, we're in huge trouble, aren't we?
Yes.
And I think part of that, for instance, in the Marcus Mission program, I've got quite a few blokes and actually people I'm quite close to that we might have difference of opinions or different of approaches when it comes to vaccines and all the rest of it. But I can still listen to them and validate their perspective. And, you know, this whether it's, vax or no vax or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But I can still validate what's happening for them and the fact that, you know, they're feeling affronted or whatever else. That's absolutely cool, you know, but I don't have to necessarily agree. I think the difference between accepting their opinion and agreeing. And I think the other thing is if we go back to circle of concern versus sphere of influence, you know, the Covey stuff.
Yeah.
You know, acknowledging their concerns, acknowledging their goals, acknowledging what it's like for them. But coming back to what you just said, well, no, I have a different focus because this is my focus and this is why I'm doing it. But maybe we agree to disagree, but we don't have to become emotionally charged over it.
That's a great comment. We agree to disagree, but they'll double down on their lie. Like, and I think sometimes what will happen is that a person will be so entrenched that they've gone that far with their thinking that they can't now back out of it. They know that they've been wronged. They know that they're wrong. Like everything that tells them is in their head is wrong, but they'll double down and they won't accept that, hey, I made a mistake. I've now got some new information. You know, what you were saying was correct. So the doubling down is something that a lot of people will do. There's another comment up here, Unball Frog. She says, I am great at conflict avoidance. I just don't bring up the things that I know will cause an argument. I pick my battles.
Can we? Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. And there's a slide there which we've used. You know, it's the Kilman stuff around conflict styles.
Which one's that?
And it's a bit of a model, so it's further down. So if we go down a bit, number 13.
Number 13, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
talk to me.
So if we look at that just for a tick, and talk about avoidance for a start, which is, you know, low concern for self, low concern for others. One of the things that's, look at those colours. I think I must have done this slide.
I think you were on psychedelics that day.
Yeah, I think so. So if we look at avoidance, like all of these conflict management styles are actually really useful to a point. You know, like emotions, all emotions are useful to a point. But if you think about avoidance and you think about the comment, when there's a threat or whatever, we don't want to engage. So short term, it's really helpful. Like if I look up and I see, you know, the roof of your studio combust into flames, I'm not going to go, let's collaborate on this, Gerald. Let's talk through whether we should survive and go outside. You know, like if there's danger or if people are overheated or if people are stuck and they do not want to, there's a point where you've got to go, time out. You know, we can't do this anymore. So avoidance is a really useful strategy. And the Gottmans say that if you hit that wall where you're starting to raise your voice and you're starting to get really emotional, that their stuff said couples have got to separate, not just for a few minutes, but a minimum of 20 minutes to let that adrenaline subside and to try and catch their breath and look at their thinking and then come back to the table. Because, you know, avoidance is really helpful when we are overheated. But there's others there. And so, for instance, if I'm the person that you're talking about,
the double down person.
High concern for self, low concern for others, competition. And competition is essentially win-lose. I'm just going to continue to hammer you until I beat you into submission, you know, mentally, not physically, hopefully. But, you know, this idea that the win-lose is that I'm just going to keep pushing it. And we know that, okay, I might even get it over the line in the short term, but long term, I'm just going to have all of this resentment that people have because it's about me being better than you. And there's an old saying that, it's okay to be right, but it's never okay to be righteous. And that's kind of interesting because competition is about, this is battle to the death. The other side is interesting too. If we look at bottom right
Don't look at the bottom.
The accommodation, low concern for self, high concern for others. It's a real danger that if I'm in any sort of relationship and I don't feel that I can present my viewpoint or I can talk it through, or I don't feel that I'm going to be heard, I might take the easy way of just going, I'm whatever you want, you have whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but eventually I become a doormat. And so, this idea that, I'm seen as an easy target and people can overrun me and they can push me. So we've got to have boundaries. We've got to know what's appropriate and what's not. And when, I really like that comment, when to step in and when not to step in. But I think that's really important. Now, if you look at kind of this win-win, it's such a wanky term, misused term,
win-win.
isn't it? But what the truth of it is, it's the process. It's the process of collaboration. I listen to you, I reflect back. You listen to me, we reflect back. We pull it apart. We identify concerns with goals, and that's essentially what mediation is about. And then we go, so Gerald, how can I meet your needs of blah, 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 with my needs of blah, 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 blah. And I'm not suggesting it always leads to an outcome that's win-win, but it's the collaborative process that establishes the goodwill. And I think, as adults, we don't want to just take our cricket bat and go home, and sulk, and say, okay, I'll give in to you, or we don't want to just crush you. We need to be able to have a process which really tries to understand the other person's position and see if there's anything in that we agree on. Because, the aged care nurses, they agreed that this wasn't good for each other and that that it's not good for the residents. And based on that assumption, can we change a bit? Can each of us do things differently? And can we agree on some ground rules for how we're going to interact so that it doesn't get in the way of our work,
I'm thinking that there's got to be some sort of a relationship, like at work, there are codes of conducts, there are values, there are things that you can and can't do at work. Do you think relationships should also have some sort of psychological contract where we sit down beforehand, and if you and I are going to be mates, or is this a bit wanky where I sit with you and I say, hey, John, this is what, is going to make us great mates. I don't want you talking about this. I need you to listen to me. I need you to and I will do this for you. So would that be a good way as a mateship, or do you just work that along the way?
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, for you and I and others that, I'm sort of close to, we've worked that out on the way. And if we're offended by each other, or which I can't remember a time where we were, but if we're offended by each other or we feel that we've crossed the line, we might say it. And we talk about it, but we're not going to talk about it in an angry way or a wounded way. We're just going to be, when, the classic old-fashioned I statement, Gerald, when this happened, this is how I felt about it, because of this reason. And I'd appreciate if we could talk about it and see how we could approach it differently.
Yeah. But if I turned around and said, fuck off, John.
Yeah, well, the conversation's kind of finished.
It's gone, isn't it? Yeah, and that's what would happen sometimes when a person's when their emotional setup is around, I just need to fight you, and you want to be the collaborator or the person who says, I just want to talk this out, but you get the person on the other end that just says, shut up, idiot, like I'm going to listen to you. Does that then say, right, I'll leave that with you?
See, I don't see that as a fight. I see that as a defence. I see that as someone defending their position, defending their ego. I feel like the will's coming in, defending the ego, and it's going, I'm not going to allow this to happen. But and the trouble with that is that's because I'm not taking responsibility for how I've impacted on others. So, there's this expression in Ireland, fair play to you, fair play. What's fair play look like?
Yeah.
Fair play is when I give you a chance to talk and I listen to you, and you give me a chance to talk and I listen to you. But coming back to that, I just want to come back to that, this idea of the ground rule. We were, Sim and I were having at some stage some concerns and some conflict, minor conflict about how far do we go to support communities and how much of our money we put in. And one of the things that really helped was having sort of like a boundary which said, okay, we can do whatever we want. That we talk about what we want, who we want to support, women, set up a refuge or Marcus Mission and partially fund the program, as long as we don't have to borrow again at our age. Being 58 or whatever, don't want to go out to the bank and borrow a big chunk of money so that I can support other people outside that. So, and that applies to the same for renovations at our house or what we need to do around it. Let's try and stick with what money we've got. Let's not, put ourselves into debt so we feel under pressure. Because one of the things that conflict happens is when we've got financial pressure, there's this base load, isn't there, where I'm really struggling because I don't think I can pay the bills, or I'm feeling like there's a lot of pressure to earn money or whatever else. So, once we did that, we actually reduced a lot of the conflict about what do we fund and what do we not. Because, I never look at my bank accounts, by the way, but pretty much ever. But Sim will say, should we do this? Should we do it? I reckon, if we can find the money for it and we've got the money somewhere and we can use it, let's go for it. So it's sort of like agreeing what are the boundaries of that, and for me that was a good example for us of not coming back to the same frustration where I've got a different view. I might be a bit more conservative, or she might be a bit more conservative, and what's the principle we're going to base this on? And that way it's sort of a third party principle rather than you fighting against me, if you know what I mean.
Mate, I think we're going to try again with Tim Heel. He is back on the line.
Good.
So whack your headphones on, and then we'll see if we can get Tim back on. All right, Tim, I think we've got you on. So how you doing?
G'day. How we doing?
Doing well, mate.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
We could hear you before, but we just
So I think I'm banging out.
Frozen up.
So I've got, hang on, just make sure my settings are right.
I don't think your settings are right again because you're not getting me.
Let's just change
just through StreamYards.
Let's put it onto there.
Yep.
How's that? Is that any better?
Well, can you hear us?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us now? No. Testing 1, 2, 3.
This is very bizarre.
Gerald, do you want to just sing?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
You can't hear us.
Can you sing a song in intermission, Gerald?
Can you sing a song?
Start spreading the news.
Let me just have a look at audio there. All right.
Really have no idea.
Let me bring someone else on. I'll kick you off for a second. I'll bring someone else on, and I'll see if I can just. I'll bring Herbert on. G'day, Herbert. How you going? Can you hear us? So maybe it's my end.
Well, I see you have me on.
Can you hear us?
I don't have any sound from you.
All right, so it's my problem.
Can you hear me?
Jeez.
All right, give it 1
Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
No, we can't. So I'm giving you
Give me a thumbs
down.
up. Can you hear me?
We
So
can
I'm
hear
giving
you.
you a thumbs down. Let me just go into audio. I'm going back into audio, and I'm going to
We're
try
creating
this
conflict
one
here. Is
here.
this purposeful?
How are we going with this one? You must be able to hear me now.
I think I found you.
Okay, mate. I'm going to put you on hold because we did have Herbert. We did have Tim Heel on.
Yeah,
so
go
I'm
ahead.
I'm going to bring Tim, and I'll bring you back a little bit later.
Yeah, sure.
Tim, how you going, mate? It's all of our problem.
I can hear you now. It must have been your end.
Yeah, it's at my end.
Tim, I
Look at
think
that.
he was just being a prick to illustrate conflict,
Hey, this is what happens on live shows.
Yeah, mate. Now that we got you
Trust
here,
me,
let's do it.
I've
Let's
been
do
there.
it. Let's have a chat. What did you? And I apologise about the stuff up. I was pushing buttons again, and I don't know. What do we got? What would you like to ask John?
Because I've only been trying to sort of wait to come in and half listening to the conversation, but I mean there's quite a bit I've picked up on, and I mean I'm doing a live show on a Thursday. I've just been on this evening. We've been talking this evening about hang on, I forgot what we're talking about. We've been talking about anxiety, stress, and depression, and how that manifests itself. But we're also talking about conflict and getting into to bother with other people, and how your attitude when you're depressed affects other people. So we didn't delve into how to manage that, but it's what we did cover was looking at how people recognise that there's something wrong with you, and you think you're just being normal, yet you're the one that's got the problem with depression, and you're taking it on other people. And it's not until you've come to realise that there is something wrong with you and taking that first step, and then seeking the help. And that's where we were coming with this program tonight. So that kind of links into what you guys are talking about with the conflict with people and etc. etc. etc.
Did you
Does
have
that
a
make sense?
Yeah, it does, mate. Did
Absolutely
you have a
makes sense.
specific like a question for John that you may have wanted to clarify while you were doing yours? Did you want something that maybe just for added extra clarification?
Well, as far as I can work out, John's talking about conflict resolutions and how would you de-escalate a situation where you've got somebody that's suffering acute depression, anxiety, and they're taking it on everybody around them. They think they're being normal. How would you suggest that somebody approaches them to get them to recognise that it's them that's the issue, not the people around them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Tim. Just to give you an example, I was doing a workshop down the Gold Coast last night with a bloke, and one of the guys was really struggling there because his son's an addict, and he doesn't want to make the changes, and he's got a lot of suicide ideation, and currently actually, as we speak, in hospital. And I think that, the hardest part here is how do you do that? We can encourage, like this guy was fantastic in the sense that unconditional positive regard, love, empathy, who you are is okay with me. It's just, that when you say this is sometimes the impact. And I just wanted you to be aware of it, So it's really important that we don't take over responsibility, because we've got to gently try and encourage people to be able to see what others are seeing. But we've got to do that through, and I don't want to sound stupid, but we've got to do that through a loving perspective. If you've got someone that feels safe with you and you're saying, mate, I care about you, I really do, and you're a really good mate of mine, but I'm worried about you, mate, because what I see is someone that's really struggling, but also someone that for some reason doesn't perhaps notice it at the moment. And I'm wondering what's stopping you, Tim, from noticing those interactions with others, and for that, because I really want to help you, mate, but it's part of this is about what you see in yourself and what's okay for you. But it's like anything. If we stay in a stage of denial or stuckness, where I'm okay the way I am, and it's what they call in a cycle of addiction, by the way, they call it pre-contemplation. This idea that, Tim, I'm not the problem, mate. You're the fucking problem. It's you. and we've got to, somehow we've got to get, and there's no recipe for it, but we've got to get around to contemplation to go, oh, maybe I've got a problem here, maybe. And a really good mate of mine, Tim, who's actually our area coordinator in Bundaberg, a guy called Adrian Pierce. He's brilliant. He heard a guy in America once say this thing, that I realised I was always at the scene of the crime, that I was the common factor. And I think that's really the hard, and I really love that expression, when you're blaming everybody else, and we've all done it, when you go, oh, the dickheads, and blah, 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 and then you go, oh, actually, I'm the one that's always at the scene of the crime. But the hard part is, how do we allow people to do that without feeling bad and guilty and shamed. And you know, with depression, it's awful, isn't it? Because it's just a big black pit, and we feel like we're a burden on other people, and we feel like you know, nothing's working, and it's this spiral that happens. So, you know, one of the things I always think, if we can still keep that unconditional positive regard, that love, if you like, for the other person, but try and come from an angle of curiosity and help them to be curious, I think that's all we can do. And for this dad, you know, down the Gold Coast, a great man, but you know what he was actually saying? He said to me, he gave me a really good example last night where he said, I said, mate, I'd be feeling really helpless if this is my son, you know. And he said, mate, we can only do so much. I focus on what I can do to enable, but I also don't get into enabling the addiction because, you know, giving money, for instance, blah, 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 enables that. So one of the things he said to me, he said, you know, I don't know whether you've seen those pool noodles, those long things that sort of float. And he said, I'm on the side of the pool holding out the pool noodle, but he's got to swim over and grab it. And he said, and that's the first step starts with him. And he said, that's agony for me as a dad, but I know I can't do it for him. So, you know, unfortunately, how do we gently, you know, in a kind way, encourage people to reflect a bit and reflect on the impact of others rather than just their intentions or their, you know, the misery that they're going through in themselves, the burden that they're feeling, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that came out this evening. I had a couple of guests on and we were talking about this, and it's the effect that it has on everybody around the person that is suffering from I mean, depression, and they don't see it in themselves, and a lot of the time it's until they get that light bulb moment when they feel that, yes, it's me, then they can take that first step on a journey to doing something about it. The thing with depression is that it's with you all your life. If you're a sort of depressive type person, it never goes away. You can manage it, but it will sneak back in from time to time. And it's recognising in yourself that you're starting to get into that dark place again, and taking the steps to get out of it. And the best way to do that is to be able to talk to people.
Yeah.
And it's like all these things. If you're suicidal and stuff like that, it's taking that first step to be able to talk to somebody. And if you open that can of worms and somebody says, "Are you all right?" No, are you really all right? And you start to open up, and then they mug you off because they've got to go and do something. That can have a devastating effect on a person's esteem and maybe push them right over the edge. So if you're going to ask that question, then you make sure that you've got the time to be able to use these and not this.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your comment. I think that it's really insightful. And there's a great comment that's come on here which says, I do not judge anyone. They judge themselves if they have empathy. And it's such a good comment because we're not going to get anywhere by shaming or making people feel guilty. And it pisses me off when people go, just, you know, harden up a bit or get over it or stop treating people like shit without that basic empathy for understanding that they're that they're going through this really tough situation, and we can only help them if they feel safe and supported by us. That's the only way. So in the groups that I work with blokes, if they feel safe, they feel supported, they feel understood, then they can do the heavy lifting. But they can't do that. And denial's an awful thing because we've all had stages of denial. Thanks for your question though, Tim.
I mean, what we're trying to push out is we're trying to destigmatise mental health because everybody sooner or later suffers from it.
Indeed.
We're trying to say it's okay not to be okay, and just to let people know that there is always somebody that you can talk to, whether it's a complete and utter stranger or it's a really close friend. There is somebody there that will listen, and as long as we can get that message out there, that it's okay not to be okay, there's somebody will listen, then we can go a long way to helping people through life.
I agree. And last comment, because we might have to go, is just this idea that traditional values, and I see some of your military uniforms behind you, traditional values of being strong and silent and self-reliant are great things, but we've got to be flexible. We've got to be able to have the courage to open up and be vulnerable. And for me, that's the ultimate test of blokes, is if they can open up and be vulnerable in a safe place and talk to other people, then the healing begins. But, it's really tough when we're anchored to those values and they're immovable. A lot of people will say, I would rather die than be vulnerable, and that's the sad part, really. Thanks, Tim.
Well,
Thanks, Tim.
The British military have gone a long, long way in recent years of going forward and destigmatising mental health, and that's where this "it's okay not to be okay" has come from, and particularly where the likes of PTSD comes in. There's a thing called TRIM, which is trauma incident management, when you're particularly away on operations and you're seeing horrific things all the time. There's a process in place to be able to talk it through and to try and help people cope with what they've seen. The Falklands was a classic where there was a real punch up going on down there. There was a lot of guys that were flown back to a hero's welcome, and there was a lot of blokes that were stuck on the ships and came back on the ships. And in recent times, they've done some analytics where the guys that were flown back are more likely to suffer from PTSD in later life than the guys that came back on the ships that were able to decompress.
Wow.
For want of a better word.
It's a terrific example.
The guys that came back. So this is why when we come out of conflict zones, they fly us into Cyprus, and we have a few days in Cyprus where you can relax, talk to people, have a few beers. The mental health teams are watching people and etc. Unfortunately, on the 7 operational tours I didn't once there was decompression coming through Cyprus. For some reason or other, I missed it every single time. Fortunately, I don't suffer too much with it.
Yeah, and great points. And I'm sorry we'll have to leave now, but I really appreciate your insight, because we've got a couple of ex-military fellas and federal police that are in our program who have really worked hard on their PTSD. And you're absolutely right. Unless we can get to that early, it can just escalate, you know, and we need to be able to do that. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for your call, mate.
You're welcome.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Gerald, and thanks, John.
All right, thank you.
It's really interesting to listen to your show.
Appreciate it,
and
mate.
you too. Thanks.
It's interesting. We got another caller, and I think it's Herb. You're ready to have a chat with Herb, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just let's bring Herb on, and Herb will add some of his insight into this wonderful big thing here. Let me just StreamYard. There we go. G'day, Herb. How you going?
I'm doing fine. Please excuse my looks. I got a cold yesterday. I feel like crap. So I look like crap.
No, you don't, Herb. I have to say you don't look like crap at all, mate.
Mate, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, John made some... I love listening to John. I can put myself in his place as a sheer amateur. Like Tim, I spent a career in the Army. So one of the things you said at the very beginning, I think you brought it up, G-Man, was about the vaxxed and the unvaxxed and family.
Yes.
So I'm very fortunate that my family's family, and we're not concerned about who's vaxxed or not vaxxed. So that was just one of the comments you guys were talking about that I just want to say. It's not that we haven't talked about it. In fact, we have. I was concerned about my grandson got the COVID, and then the school wanted to give him the jibbity jab. And I talked with my son, and my son, because he's in the Army, he had to get it, and it didn't have a choice. But he said no, but hell no, because of a problem with myocarditis. I can't seem to get that out. So he's not. He's has a natural immunity. So that just brought it to mind. But I assume Tim He was a career soldier like me.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of counseling. So it's very entertaining to hear what John has to say. I did a lot of counseling. Some of it was professional counseling about their job. Some of it was conflict counseling. It was usually a young soldier having difficulties with his spouse and trying to do that. And I found that turns out you may not realize it because I'm always talking, but apparently I was a pretty good listener, took notes, and always got back to them. They didn't always like what I had to say, but I always got back to them. But my last assignment in a hospital was at Fort Polk, and our patient relations sergeant major had a heart attack. And the hospital sergeant major grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "You're it." So,
Wow.
again, I think it was listening, taking notes, and most of the time it was a conflict between the patient and the clinic or the doctor, a little of fault on both sides. And sometimes it was the patient's fault, and that was the hardest to deal with because they didn't want to hear my answer. And sometimes it was the doctor's fault, and they should be pretty arrogant SOBs. But it was very rewarding, and I enjoyed doing it. And just the last comment is as you know, G-Man, I told you my wife committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And John made a comment about how do I put it? Maybe this way. My ex-mother-in-law, my wife wasn't good enough for her. And when she attempted suicide the first time, it's like, oh my God, how could you do this to my family? That was her attitude.
God.
So we got counseling, and I did everything that I could because, she made me smile every day. She was the light of my life. But
Herb,
we were supposed to have.
sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt. I remember talking with you before, and I just have to say I really admire your whole approach to not only recovery but also what you were doing in terms of your conflict role there, and that is, listening and taking notes and reflecting back, because it's all that good collaborative process stuff, isn't it? And I think, isn't it just awful and so hurtful when people are shamed, in this case, your mother-in-law, that your wife has passed away by suicide, and they almost think it brings a blight on the family. I mean, you are so graceful in the way you've dealt not only with your wife's passing, but supporting your kids and your grandkids. I know we spoke about that before. It's impressive because what you're illustrating is unconditional positive regard. You're in everything you do. It's about, how do I join with the person, and how do I listen to the person, and how do I honour the person rather than be offended by it.
It took a lot of counseling for me too. And of course, so my wife wasn't my kid's mother. My kid's mother left me for somebody else
Okay.
right after I retired. So X wasn't an issue.
Wow.
But my kids were worried. And even my boss said, "You're not yourself." So one of the things I learned at counseling is, well, my kids had to beat me about the head and shoulders, honestly. And so did my doctor. I finally got counseling. And it was very helpful. But my kids were worried about that I would do something stupid. And I said, as much as I love my wife and I want to be with her, honestly, so.
All right, mate. Look, you just started to break up there in the end. We did get right to the end of that
Thanks, Herb.
conversation.
Great to see you. I didn't see your picture last time, but I spoke to you, so it's really.
No, I
really
enjoyed
nice
listening
see.
to you. Yeah, it's nice to talk to you again. I'm glad you came on. When I saw that, I didn't think G-Man was going to be on today, and he's on. Oh, look, John's on. So
That's really
again,
nice.
excuse my looks. I'm running a fever and I'm coughing like hell. So
Good to
I
see
should
you,
be fine
Herb.
by tomorrow. Though.
Good luck. Lovely to see you
So,
again.
G-Man, best to your dad.
Thank you, mate.
Hope you're enjoying the coffee.
Mate, loving the
You
coffee.
should get something else in the mail.
Ooh.
I have no idea when. It'll be a surprise. And John, it's good to see you again.
All right, mate.
Hope to see you again soon.
Okay, buddy. We'll talk
Thanks,
to you soon.
Herb.
Bye.
Cheers.
Can I say just a couple of quick words?
Sure.
I just really love, the way Herb does stuff, deals with life. And, part of this, I just want to come back to something he said, which links to quite a few comments here about being kind to people and tuning in. And there was an original comment going back a long time ago that the only time that I finally did something when I was really depressed was when someone I respected grabbed my arm and said, mate, you're pushing people away, just, I care for you. And so if it's coming from that point of love, then that's really, really important, isn't it? That, I know your intentions are honourable. But I think the other thing is there was a comment that fairly recently came up, and, this idea, and I appreciate nobody's going to understand suicide because, at the end of the day, your head's not straight when it happens, it's not, it's full stop. And we can't judge people for it. Sure, is it selfish? Should we be angry? Blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, we lost Marcus, and he was living with us. And the thing is, he's in a different state when it happens. But the point I would make is being kind and gentle and giving people a bit of time to work through stuff. I just find this incredible contrast between someone that has a physical ailment where they get this incredible empathy and then mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety or PTSD, which is just fucking suck it up and get on with it and move past it or go for a run or whatever. Yeah. And it just frustrates me, because it shows just a total lack of understanding of what someone else is going through. And we don't need to go through to appreciate it. We will never understand it, and we'll never try to completely understand their experience. But we need to be able to be there for people when they're going through that, because it's the positive regard that gets people to open up, not the guilt and shame.
I'll tell you, it's having a conversation with John that we do, and I love having you on here, John. You know that. I love you coming here and drinking all my coffee and eating all my food and not having any of my beetroot juice that I made specially for you when you wouldn't drink it. But I like having these conversations because it just opens up, people's eyes to be able to think we don't have to be self-serving. We got to be self-accepting. I think it's to accept that other people are hurting or they're in a level of pain is sometimes hard for us to do, because if your arm was cut off, I'd go, man, that would have to hurt, wouldn't it? If you broke your knee and your leg and you're struggling, I would say, mate, it looks like you're struggling. But this internal dialogue that we have with ourselves, that we can't see it, so it mustn't be a real problem. And I love your comment there, mate, just get up and walk it off. What's wrong with you? What is the old saying, I think my mother used to say something like, are your arms broken? And it'd be like, well, no. Well, then, pick yourself up, brush yourself off and get on with it. But the understanding there was that that's my mother. She knew where we were coming from. So they understood.
And sometimes we need help to be able to do that. But I think the tough part is, trying to give people confidence and courage to take that first difficult step. And I was speaking to a bloke just a couple of days ago. We're trying to get him into the program, and we had this conversation for an hour. And I said, mate, let's be really honest here. The greatest courage you're ever going to show in your whole life is coming along to our program and opening up and talking a bit about your depression and also continuing the work you're doing with your psych. Because he and I both know that the first couple of sessions when you're talking, it's the worst thing. You feel really violated in a way, and you got to pull your chest open and show your heart. And it's really tough when you're feeling like a failure and you're feeling really vulnerable. But it is hugely courageous as well to do that. Mate,
that's our hour.
That is.
That went quick. Jeez. I know, it goes really quick.
I thought we were at the 8-minute mark.
9 minute. I thought it's. I'm going to have you back on. You know, people know that you're going to be a regular on here because I think your insights, and also when I get to talk to you too, it settles me down a lot too. and it makes me start to double think, and I love that idea that we can split the world in half, and we do all have differences, but maybe it's just take a moment and just realize that, hey, I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but I have to agree with your position. I think that there's actually a law. It's called Miller's Law. If I can put myself into your position and agree with you in principle, but not agree with you in what you're saying, then at least I can open up a discussion rather than shutting it down.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of putting it, mate. And Dr. Wayne Dyer once said, and I was in a seminar that he said, where he said, sometimes when you have a choice between being right and being kind, choose kind. And I went, oh, that's good, because right's often about ego and standing up for our position and stuff.
Well, my big takeaway from the day is that you can be right, but you don't have to be righteous. Because I've always heard of the other one, you can have an opinion, but you don't have to be opinionated.
Yeah, exactly.
John,
Well,
I love having you on. For those people who have always been here and always supported the channel, thank you so much for supporting. Become a member. We'd love you to have to be part of this ever so shrinking crowd that we have here. But when John comes on here, it always seems to improve. Maybe that's why. So I'm not going to be on tomorrow. I'm actually working. And in fact, John, I'm going to be up your way. I'm going to be up close to where you are, up in Caloundra. So, but I won't pop in and see you.
No, please do.
No, I won't, because I've got things to do. John, I understand that you would like me to pop in, but I have things to do.
Nice reflection, mate.
Nice reflection. All right, everyone. Don't forget... John, you need to put your headphones on for this one, because you're going to love this little girl. I love this little girl at the end because I think it resonates with everything that we do here. Thanks, everyone. I'm not on tomorrow, and don't forget, if I'm not on, I'm not on, but I will be on Sunday morning, and we're just going to have the usual program coming back to you live. So, people, like we say always...
The things that make you happy, go do those things. Like right now. What are you waiting for? Go!
So cool.
So good, isn't it? Don't forget, everyone, like the smash button. Love to see you on here. It's always good to have you on. You people are a good lot of people. You know that. You know I'm making it up too. Karen says, so loving this session. Thanks, John. Cheers, G-Man. Hail, Sir Rudi. Don't forget, everyone, support the channel. Support the channel. And if you don't like this show...
去你的!
Yeah, just for you. All right, good people. All right. There is no backstage today. I've got things to do. Thanks, Linda. Love the road trip. Unboiled Frog, thank you so much. Wiley, right now, go. She is beautiful. Thanks, Cha Cha. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, gents. Thanks for the chat. Yeah, happy mental health for us all. Cheers, Rudi. Bye, everyone. Or bye. Bye-bye. Cheers, mate. Super cheers to Rudi. Yeah. Nice one, everyone. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having you on. Don't forget not on tomorrow. Some people got to work, you know. Cha-cha, great show. Gerald, bring him back again. Don't push it. Sorry for all the stuff ups today, people. I apologise to Tim. Cheers, everyone. You're really late. Yeah. All right. Oh, who's going to be last? Horace Podmore. Cheers, Rudi. Not yet. Let's leave the last one to Anime, who just simply says, cheers, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Don't forget, I'm not on tomorrow, but I will be on Sunday. Love you all. As you all know, be good and do the things that make you happy.